Hello, my name is David Kirchhoffer and I'm the Director of the Queensland Bioethics Centre at Australian Catholic University. And I've been asked to answer the question or provide some comment on the question about what kind of economy we ought to have from a Christian ethical perspective. Now, I'm not an economist and I don't intend to answer this question as an economist. I'll point to some economics, but I'm not an economist. What I will try to do is really address this question from an ethical perspective. That is, try to answer the question around what ought we to do, what should be normative, what kind of economy ought we to create. And as a theological ethicist, I do so from a perspective that is theological. That is, it begins from a number of assumptions about the kind of world we live in, about what is good, about what is meaningful and valuable. So it's colored, if you like, by the rational belief that the universe is a meaningful and purposeful place. And it's meaningful and purposeful precisely because this universe is willed by a loving God. God wants it to exist. And this God has been revealed in the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And the core meaning of this incarnation is that God cares about human beings, every individual human being, and that God cares about all of God's creation, and wants to establish a reign, a kingdom that is characterized by justice, peace, and joy. Now, those are good things. Justice, peace, and joy. They are values in and of themselves. And the things created by God, the human beings and all of the natural world, are good things in and of themselves. Why is this important? Well, because it means that we can say very clearly something about the economy. The economy, unlike those other goods, is not an end in itself. It is not an intrinsically good thing. Rather, the economy is merely an instrumental good. It's good because it serves the purposes of human beings. Economies exist to serve some other good that must be good in itself. From a Christian perspective, that good is God, the reign of God, the kingdom of justice, peace, and joy. And so every human being and all of creation are the goods that the economy is meant to serve. These are the things that have intrinsic value. They are willed by God. Not money, not the economy. In fact, no human institution can be said to be willed by God in the same kind of way, and so no human institution can be said to have that same kind of intrinsic value, that intrinsic worth for which we use the word dignity. So we can talk about the dignity of human beings, the dignity of creation, but it makes no sense to speak of the dignity of the economy. And so, with Pope St. John Paul II, as he said in Laborem Exercens, we can say that the economy was made for human beings, not human beings for the economy. As I said, I'm not an economist, but an economy that necessarily excludes some people from participation, or that necessarily means that some people have no choice but to engage in degrading working conditions, cannot be said to be a morally good economy. It's definitely morally problematic, and it certainly doesn't seem to serve the ends of the intrinsic worth of every human being. The good news is that there are other ways of conceiving of the economy that better correspond to the kinds of worth and value that we're interested in. One way derives from the work of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum, an economist and philosopher respectively, who talk about human capabilities, fundamental capabilities. And the idea is to build an economy in which these capabilities that are characteristic of human beings can really find expression. These capabilities include our freedom, our rationality, but also our capacity to love, to play, to laugh, to create, and to strive. And these capacities together are the kinds of capacities that we want our economy to facilitate, to provide opportunities for. There are three big philosophical / economical movements, I suppose, that you might call them, that help us to see that this is not simply a pipe dream. There is a workable solution where we can really build economies that pay attention to human beings in a real way. So I'm going to briefly talk about these, but they obviously deserve much more than what I can offer. The first is an example of the Grameen Bank, which is a micro-lending model that lends money, small loans, primarily to women to start their own businesses. And they're very short-term loans, and with the money that, let's say there's an identified need for a sewing business, a woman is provided some small money to buy the sewing machine necessary to begin that business in the village, and pays that loan back very quickly. What's important about this model is that unlike the standard models of lending that we're all familiar with, this does not see a poor person with no income as a high risk. So typically, when we see a poor person with no income, they're a high risk for a lender. We don't give them a lot of money at all, or if we give them any at all. And if we do give them money, when banks give them money, what they tend to do is charge a higher interest rate than they might charge someone who has a high income. So you're penalized for being poor. On this model, the opposite is the case. This person is treated as a person who is sincere in their attempt to bring themselves out of poverty by starting a small business to meet a specific need. They treat them as a person of authenticity and integrity who will pay back a loan. And so instead of charging a higher loan, the recognition that this person has less money means that they charge a much smaller interest rate. This is a very successful model, but at its core, from an ethical perspective, is the fascinating change in the assumption about the person who is actually borrowing the money. The second example is the basic income grant movement, or the big movement. Basic income grants are interesting in that they start on the underlying assumption that what people really need is to freely exercise choice in how, when, and where they work, the kinds of work they do. That, in other words, in our current economy, a lot of the work we do is not by choice, it's work we have to do. And if we were to remove the economic incentive, the monetary incentive for work, what would you do? And it's a fascinating question to contemplate. What would you do if money was not an issue? If you didn't need money in the first place? If the money you needed to live was not linked to the work that you needed to do? So the idea in the basic income grant is that everybody gets provided with a basic income, and that frees people up to do what they truly believe to be meaningful. Now, that might mean they go and do work that in order precisely to earn money so that they can buy a better television. But it also means a large amount of unpaid work that is now at the moment not monetized in any way in our economy is really given an opportunity to flourish. One thinks of artists, creative works, one thinks of childcare, one thinks of all the volunteer work in the care of elderly people and other things, which people would now be free to do because they wouldn't have to find work in order to earn money, and so have to give their childcare over to someone else. They'll be able to look after their kids themselves, as an example. The third movement, I suppose, is one in which the emphasis is not so much on freedom, but on meaning. So here the idea is it's not enough merely to say that human beings should be free to choose, but rather we want to focus on how people engage in work that is true to themselves. So it's about creating a correspondence between the kind of work I do and my deepest values, my deepest convictions, moral convictions. The opposite of which is a sense of alienation. I work because I need the money, but I'm not really in any way, as a human being, attached to that work. I'm alienated from myself through the action of working. So in the meaningful work paradigm, my work becomes true to who I am. It's similar to the idea of a kind of a dignity of work. And there are, again, models that exist that help to explain this. One of these is labor-owned companies. So giving labor, the workers in a company, also a share in the company, ownership of the company. And that's not merely an economic incentive, but also engages them in the decision-making of the company so that they can see how their work is part of a bigger picture to which they commit themselves because they agree with the mission and goals and purpose of the company and the products that it makes. So it's a much more richer conception of how you engage labor in decision-making processes of companies. And my colleague Stuart Braun in the Faculty of Theology and Philosophy at ACU has done a lot of work in this area, and it's worth finding out more about it. So the point of this is that in a time of crisis like this one, where COVID-19 has put a huge dent in the economy, as in times of war and post-war, it's an opportunity to reset the economy and to see where opportunities exist to create better economies that really serve the goods of human beings. And the Old Testament is full of ideas like this, the idea of the sabbatical year or the Jubilee year. And many of you will remember in the year 2000, there was the whole Jubilee movement, which was about the cancellation of debts for Africa. And this is a similar idea. It's an opportunity here for us to reset and go, well, where can we cancel the debts so that people are able to begin again? Put another way, where are we able to remove the imbalances, the privilege that puts some people way ahead of others so that people are forced into an economy where they don't have real choices, where they are forced to accept work that is demeaning, or where they find themselves in situations where they cannot even get work and actively participate in an economy. And I think it's interesting because perhaps ironically, the COVID-19 pandemic has, of course, pushed many people into social isolation. And in that social distancing, we've turned to technology like this to be able to communicate. Many people have worked from home and discovered that, in fact, that's not such a bad idea. Working from home has a number of advantages, and many people have become more productive. They've actually even been in more contact with people by virtue of the technology that's available than they might have otherwise been, because the circle of people that they come into contact with is, in a way, ironically, bigger, not smaller, by virtue of what the technology can do. They've become more productive because there are fewer distractions, and they've cut out the 2-hour-a-day commute to work, which means they have more time to spend with their families. So that's one example of how we could really go, well, hang on, how do we integrate this better into our existing economy so that we take cars off the road, give people more time to spend with their families, and increase productivity at the same time, and people can take ownership of how and when they work, so there's more freedom in their engagement. That's one example. So I think that's a fascinating example of how there is a real opportunity for us now to think about how we can make a more humane economy. And this brings me now to my final point, because it's not only for human beings that Jesus was incarnated, but for the whole world, for all of creation. Scripture is full of references to creation and how creation also is part of God's plan, God's design or desire for salvation. And so in the spirit of Pope Francis's Laudato Si, his encyclical on creation and the environment, we might expand on what John Paul II said and say not only that the economy must serve man, not man the economy, but we could also say that all of creation was not made for the economy. The economy must indeed serve the good of creation. And one thing is clear, our present economy does not do this. The outbreak of a disease like COVID-19, very interestingly, which is a so-called zoonotic disease, and disease that's transmitted from animals to human beings, has been linked to our disregard for ecology as human beings have pressed always further into the few wild spaces left, we come into contact with new animals and we upset the balance. We upset the ecology that is at stake, at play in those environments. And this exposes us in turn. It has an effect. So as we affect the ecology, so the ecology affects us. And there are numerous examples in the scientific literature of this. I'll give you one very simple example because it's a well-established one. When farmers poisoned eagles in an effort to protect their lambs from predatory birds, what it did, the effect that it had, is that the eagles were no longer there. They couldn't then prey on their normal prey populations. Those populations exploded and ate much of the grazing, and so you had a vicious cycle in which you ended up doing damage to what the farmers were able to do in the first place. And so there's a whole new movement to bring the eagles back into and leopards and wolves and other things into a productive coexistence with pastoralists around the world. And it really is fascinating work. The point of this is that there really are ways in which we can cooperate with creation, with nature, rather than always seek to overpower it, to dominate it. And this is what lies behind the philosophy of One Health, which is driving much of the work of the World Health Organization at the moment. One Health is a collaboration between scientists and philosophers, scientists of all persuasions, zoologists, botanists, ecologists, and the medical fraternity to work on how we can understand health from a broader perspective. Animal health and environmental health are, of course, linked to human health. And if we hold those things together, we can far more effectively deal with the threats of these kinds of diseases in the future. So in the post-COVID economy, there is a real opportunity to make a positive impact on the non-human natural environment, and it starts with our economy and how we engage in that economy. It starts with not having to do the 2-hour commute, not having to drive to work every day. It starts with being able to buy local products. During COVID, we haven't been able to access all the foreign products that we might have otherwise accessed. Buying local products reduces emissions, etc., or has an impact on them anyway. In short, it gives us an opportunity to recalibrate the economy by living simply, so that we have more time to live a fully human life by achieving fully meaningful things, by focusing on the things that really matter.